Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all members of Thematic Working Group 3 of the UN Network on Migration, I wish to extend a warm welcome to all participants who join us today for the launch of the guidance note on regular pathways for admission and stay for migrants in situations of vulnerability. The guidance note that we are presenting today is the result of the inclusive and participatory work carried out over the past year by Thematic Working Group 3. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been pleased to co-lead this thematic working group along with ACT Alliance and the Asia Pacific Refugee Network. But let me underscore that this is a joint endeavor benefiting from the broad and diverse expertise of a wide variety of UN and civil society stakeholder members of this working group. The guidance note has been developed to support implementation of the commitment made in the Global Compact for Migration towards the expansion and diversification of pathways for regular migration, in particular, in order to respond to the situations of vulnerability faced by migrants. The Global Compact for Migration acknowledges that migrants may face vulnerability to human rights violations due to the situations that compel them to leave their country of origin, the circumstances they face during transit and at destination, or due to their identity or personal circumstances. Vulnerability can arise from both personal and situational factors, which will often intersect or exist simultaneously, but in no instance it is an innate characteristic of a particular person or group of people. Therefore, migration policies are very significant because they have the potential to either exacerbate or reduce these situations of vulnerability and ideally prevent them from arising in the first place. Pathways for regular migration are a key policy in this regard. They are an effective means to prevent migrants from entering into situations of vulnerability as they avoid migrants undertaking unsafe migration journeys, and they facilitate migrants' access to rights and services in countries of destination. In this way, pathways reduce migrants' exposure to exploitation, abuse, and human rights violations. Pathways for regular migration can also reduce and address existing situations of vulnerability. For instance, by providing admission and stay to migrants in the context of disaster and climate change, maintaining family unity, protecting the lives of migrants suffering from serious health conditions, supporting survivors of gender-based violence, human trafficking, and forced labor, or protecting migrants from refoulement. This guidance note aims to ensure that states are better aware of and can be inspired by existing options for regular admission and stay for migrants in situations of vulnerability, with a view of expanding the availability of pathways, improving their accessibility and affordability, ensuring clear, transparent, rights-based criteria that are responsive to the vulnerabilities of migrants, and establishing clear procedures in conformity with essential procedural safeguards. The response to the multi-stakeholder questionnaire circulated by Working Group 3, which informed the development of this guidance, revealed that there is a rich variety of existing state practice. We will learn more about some of these national policies during the panel discussion and stand ready to explore avenues to make these practices more visible, widespread, and institutionalized. I wish to thank the co-sponsors of this event, our distinguished panelists, the Secretariat, the members of the Thematic Working Group 3, and all of you for your participation. I now hand over the floor to the moderator of our panel discussion, Caroline Gortalo, from the Asia Pacific Refugee Network, a co-lead of the Working Group 3. Carolina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Todd, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It is very encouraging to see so many people joining us today for our launch of the guidance note on regular pathways for admission and stay for migrants in situations of vulnerability. My name is Carolina Gotardo, and I'm one of the co-leads of the working group on regular pathways for migrants in vulnerable situations, representing the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. And we're co-leading alongside the OHCHR and ACT Alliance. And I'm very pleased to be chairing this panel that is going to focus, as Todd was saying, on really looking at the promising practices and opportunities to expand and to diversify pathways for migrants in situations of vulnerability. So what we're going to do today is that we will be speaking about a number of different issues associated with these promising practices and opportunities to expand pathways, including regularization, family life and unity, human rights and humanitarian-based pathways, COVID-19 related pathways, and disaster and climate change related pathways. And today, we have a fantastic panel, and we're lucky to have excellent speakers joining us here. So for each of the sub-themes, there will be a government representative speaking first about the promising practices on the specific issues, and that will be followed by a member of the working group with expertise on the issue that will also share some reflections with all of us. I would like to thank our panelists for joining us today and very much look forward to your reflections. And I would also like to remind you that our agenda is very tight today, and we need to ensure that there is time for interventions from the floor at the end of the presentation. So we have 5 minutes for every intervention, and I will be reminding you when you have around 30 seconds left. And thank you so much for your understanding with this. So without much further ado, I would like to start with the first subsection, and we're going to focus on family life and unity. We have Ambassador Federico Villegas, who is the permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations office in Geneva. And that will be followed by Ian Kaisel from the International Migrants Bill of Rights, IMBR initiative, who is a member of the working group. So we start with Ambassador Villegas. Buenas tardes, Embajador Villegas, y muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Tiene la palabra.
With the Ambassador, thanks for being with us. You have the floor. Ambassador? Can you hear me well? Yeah, we can hear you very well, Ambassador Villegas. Okay, so I'm not able to turn on my camera, but I'm going to basically just go ahead and speak. Oh, here it is, I've managed. Right, so we can now see you and hear you. On you go. Thank you very much for having invited me here. Thank you very much for the panelists for having allowed me to actually switch the order around and come in earlier than I was supposed to because I have another commitment. Okay, so first off, in Argentina, we have actually ratified all of the treaties to do with human rights, and a lot of them have parts dedicated to family unity, and this is something that is constitutionally picked up in Argentina because it's within the human rights treaties and it's incorporated into our legislation, our migration legislation, which was a paradigm change from a previous era in Argentina when we had a dictatorship. We actually already went in there with a more modern based legal approach that incorporated human rights. We said that even though some of this is discretionary when it comes to actually determining human human rights policies and controlling people entering into the territories, our priority would be human rights, and that's why basically keeping families together is the first point of call when it comes to our dealing with migrants coming into our country. First off, our legislation says that one of the objectives, the specific objectives, would be allowing people to enjoy their right to family reunification. Our state guarantees that right for parents with minor children or children who are disabled, and we basically allow them to become regular Argentinian residents. And so we don't actually need these people to be formally married so that they would be able to get access to residency based on family reunification. So basically the next legal apparatus that we have basically contemplates it all, and Article 44 on the International Convention that governs migrant workers. And so we basically want to base this on family unification. As I said, there are certain elements of this that are transposed into our regulation, and we want to basically ensure voluntary access to migrants and their children in the same conditions of protection, shelter and rights that Argentinian nationals are afforded, especially when it comes to social services, public services, health, education, justice, being able to work, and social justice in general. And so we've been able to move forward leaps in terms of this family regeneration. There's been a lot of displaced people nonetheless who have been forced to separate from their family members, and we continue to suffer the effects of a pandemic, which has meant that we've had to provisionally close our borders. Nevertheless, the same decree that basically prevented people from coming into the country allowed us to be able to create exceptions so as to be able to deal with humanitarian cases. So we, prior to this, authorised foreigners being able to get into our country still in spite of the ban, the restriction on people getting in, so that they can reunify with people who are already Argentinian residents. At the same time, we were able to basically stop transitory temporary resident permits from running out. We're able to extend those online, and we're able to do that on our website as well as through e-certificates that proved residency. And we were able to basically freeze the payments for residence passes, and so we're able to waive those. And so what we're trying to do here is that, in spite of the difficulties presented by the pandemic, we'll be able to still protect those human rights that we're bound to protect through international human rights law and through our own constitution. Thank you very much. I think I was just about to get in on the 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Ambassador. You did it spot on, just on time. Thank you for having spoken to us about the access of immigrants and families with the same rights as nationals, and the inclusive schema, even in these COVID times, and the procedures to make that happen. Thank you very much for your intervention.
Move on and pass the floor to Ian Keisel from the IMBR initiative. Ian, as I was saying before, has been a very active member of the working group. So the floor is yours, Ian.
Thank you, Carolina. Honorable Chair, distinguished excellencies and colleagues, and a particular thanks to my colleague Ambassador Villegas and to the Mission of Argentina and our other member state hosts and attendees, as well as the UN Migration Network and the co-leads of the thematic working group for the opportunity to intervene today, and for a participatory and integral process in the past year and a half. In the Global Compact for Migration, states expressly committed to, and I quote here, adapt options and pathways for regular migration in a manner that upholds the right to family life and responds to the needs of migrants in a situation of vulnerability, with a view to expanding and diversifying pathways. The recent guidance note by the network is an important contribution to this broader goal of expanding pathways. It provides guidance to states on how to reduce migrant vulnerabilities. That's perhaps most significant because it defines and provides examples of regular pathways and demonstrates how migrants can become vulnerable and, in great detail, how states can use pathways to respond to that vulnerability. Today, I have the pleasure of addressing you on an important aspect of this topic that I suggest has the prospect of driving expanded pathways and therefore protection of the rights of migrants, even in these dark times for migration, family unity. It's the topic of a policy brief that the IMBR initiative released earlier today and which was authored by my colleague, Becca Bayless. Let me begin with 3 reasons that states should create and make more widely available pathways for family unity. First, it's clear that those pathways both protect family unity and have demonstrated positive outcomes for migrants and host communities. Second, family unity is an important legal right for all, and for children, it implicates the rights of the child and the best interest of the child principle. Importantly, human rights law and standards protect a broad concept of family, recognizing relationships beyond blood and birth, and the law to which states have agreed places affirmative obligations on states to open pathways and facilitate admission or stay in a range of circumstances to avoid violating the rights of the child or arbitrarily or unlawfully interfering with the rights of families. Third, states are already doing this in large and small ways. It's important to note that states also create much of the family separation that we see. However, they prioritize family migration and at times provide pathways to reunification. If we combine these 3 factors, benefits to member states, migrants' rights, and existing state practice, we can distill several key recommendations for how this guidance note should be used by states, the UN network, and stakeholders. First, family unity should be a cornerstone of migration policy and of expanded pathways for legal migration. Family unity can be supported by centering migration-related decisions in family unity rights. Promising examples include Argentina, about which we've just heard in detail, as well as Poland. Second, family unity should be a core component of all legal migration. States should create regular pathways for family members of any category of legal migration and allow those family members to have similar status and benefits to the sponsor or principal migrant. We can see promising examples again in Argentina and also in Brazil, the Netherlands, and Bulgaria. States should use a broad definition of family in all migration pathways. And we see promising examples here in Brazil, the Netherlands, Finland, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, and France. And our colleague just shared, again, an example from Argentina. States should remove administrative barriers to family unity in current immigration procedures. And here we see promising examples in France, Bulgaria, Finland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. Third, states should create new mechanisms to facilitate family unity through new avenues for admission. New pathways for migration should be created to facilitate family unity as a central component to migration. These pathways could include humanitarian programs, overseas processing centers that facilitate and expedite family reunification from third countries, as well as private sponsorship. Positive examples here can be found in the United States, in Germany, in Brazil, Colombia, and in Canada. Fourth, states must prioritize the best interests of the child and allow the possibility of transnational migration in order to facilitate family unity when making decisions pertaining to child migrants. And here we see positive examples in the Netherlands, in France, and several other states. Of course, not all of these positive practices are widely available to all migrants, including in particular during the pandemic, but these are practices that can be adapted and expanded by member states. And I have pasted the link to the policy brief in the chat. Honorable Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, these recommendations are grounded in the principle that family unity must be a cornerstone of migration policy. As such, I urge member states to implement the guidance note in a manner that creates or reforms laws and practices, draws from existing state practices and from human rights law and standards, and takes seriously the goal in the GCM of ensuring family unity in the context of mobility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for such a concrete presentation and also right on time. And thank you for talking about the policy brief from the IMBR initiative and also why the main reasons why family reunification is so important and why this is beneficial both for migrants but also for states. And finishing by just highlighting how family unity is such a cornerstone of migration policy. So thank you for that. And now we're moving on to our second subsection or sub panel. And here we are going to talk about regularization, and we are going to have Lucas Gomez, who is the presidential advisor for the borders of the government of Colombia, and Camila Barreto Maya from the Centro de Estudios Legales y Sociales CELS, who is also a member of the thematic working group. Y muchas gracias a Lucas, buenos días y bienvenido al panel. Y gracias por estar con nosotros hoy, particularmente.
Lucas, good day to you. Thanks for being part of the panel. Especially, I know that you've got a lot of other commitments today, so welcome and you have the floor. Thank you very much, Carolina. A very special shout out to everyone. I would like to thank Argentina, Canada, Morocco, the Philippines and Portugal, and the permanent mission of Thailand and Geneva. Obviously, the government of Colombia has the opportunity right now within this framework of the Global Compact to talk about the situation in Colombia. I'd just like to basically give you a summary of what this process of regularization in the face of the huge Venezuelan migrant influx in Colombia through figures so that you can get this on the radar. First off, we know that the Venezuelan migrant crisis, we know it's the second largest of its kind in the world after the Syrian migrants crisis. And all predictions will say that it will be the biggest at the end of this year. Colombia is the first reception country of these migrants, 24% of them, 5.6 million of them who have had to leave their country. Venezuela have decided to settle down in Colombia. For us, this has been a transformation, a complete transformation in the way in which we have actually dealt with migration, because Colombia historically was a country that people migrated out of, and now it's, in the last 5 years, it's been a country that people have migrated to. So we've gone from 150,000 foreigners and we've gone to more than 12 million. So imagine this in a middle income country in just the space of a short space of time. It's been a massive influx for us, and so we've done this to underline the same concept of respecting human rights, and that's something that on the 8th of February, our president, together with Filippo Grandi, actually announced a special status of protection for the Venezuelan migrant people. It was a massive regularization of all those Venezuelan migrants that are already in our territory, and that's something that us as a country, we have to understand, and it's that they want to stay. They're not people who are coming here for a while. Their vocation is to actually settle down and live in our territory. And so this has been, as I've said, over 1,072,000 people. And so basically we need to think about something that for us is really important, Carolina, and that is that regulation in itself, in and as of itself, is not enough. When you're talking about this scale and a challenge of this magnitude, what you have to look for is that regularization is really the key to socio-economic integration. And as Colombian government, within this logic of state policy, regularization for us is the first step towards normalization and integration, and this is the first state. That's why we were able to implement this temporary protection status, and that's why we've been able to implement this in figures that even the most optimistic reports wouldn't have been able to provide. 800,000 people in just 2 months and a few days having started off the process. We're talking about 1,079,000 Venezuelans are now official in our territories. This 1 million, so this 1,790,000 is that they have basically filled in this report so as to understand those who are in our territory. So as for us, I would like to say that in terms of the massive influx that we're seeing and this question that we're opting to deal with, we are trying to work on the connection with public policies and basically taking better public policy decisions so as to be able to better integrate the migrant population in our territory. And I'm going to finish up being respectful to our colleagues by saying that in Colombia, regularizing the situation of all of these Venezuelan migrants was the only situation that we had available to us, the only option that we had available to us to make these people visible, to make these people who were already in our territory invisible, to make them visible. Because when someone's invisible, you're not able to basically take public policy decisions to benefit them. So definitively, what's important here for us in Colombia is that the Venezuelan migrants are able to achieve socio-economic integration, because that's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us in Colombia. We are convinced here that if we're going to better Venezuelan people's life conditions and life opportunities, we're also going to give Colombian people the tools through which to be able to get the best benefit out of those newly arrived migrants. Thank you, Carolina. I know you have a lot of experience on this topic, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucas. Thank you for really having shared with us the actual scale of what's happened in Colombia, including the figures that you've given us, because really what this has implied in terms of the transition of what's happening in Colombia, and also that statute of protection. When we talk about these 1.74 million Venezuelan migrants, I mean, this is something that we have to visualize, and this really is something that we have to share in this forum. And I think that we're now going to pass the floor on to Camila Barreta Mayo from CELS, who's been working on this issue for some time now, and you have the floor. Thank you very much, Carolina. Can you hear me? Well, it's a real pleasure to be part of this panel from CELS. We obviously are very active in the process of the Global Compact, and so we're taking some steps forward here for this implementation and for it to be meaningful. And so if I'm going to take something from this process, since the New York Declaration, there was a global consensus that we had to review states' migration policies and the negative impacts that some of these were having. So it's within a framework of some very complex migration pathways that we know and violations of human rights. States basically recognised the need to work on new consensus and new paradigms to respect people who were moving from one country to another, and also respecting state agreements, which is obviously very important when dealing with a phenomenon such as that which we're dealing with today. Regularization is key to this. Obviously, the Global Compact wants to promote safe, regular and orderly migration. Can you hear me? Can you see me okay? Sorry, it's just that my camera moved. Okay, so the Global Compact seeks to promote safe, regular and orderly migration, and as regards the South American experience, which the Argentinian ambassador always spoke about, it should be seen that family reintegration is actually key to this, because crossing borders is a reality that has very severe consequences when it comes to social integration, because basically illegal immigration basically undermines the state's capacity to protect these people and the communities that they belong to. And studies have shown that in countries where this has been adopted as a policy, there was no impact, negative impact. These are myths around the policies, and it's true that restrictive policies actually promoted an unsafe, disorganized and non-orderly migration. And so we can see that we have to deal with people who are in irregular situations.
Generar algunos acuerdos mínimos.
After the negotiation, we got some minimum results which can help or may help to a change in paradigm. So in Objective 5, we have to generate, strengthen and flexibility of all these agreements for education, family, life and unity based in bilateral actions and decisions. Objective 7, already mentioned by Ian, it's about access to an individual evaluation, allowing regularization on a case-by-case basis. Also recognizing the need to create accessible and quick ways to have the new status so that they are regular migrants, reducing the vulnerability, and also facilitating the individual evaluation of their status, both regular, with no fear to be ejected from the country. We also must make sure that the determination of the status is done in a proper way. This guideline for staying and admission of migrants is a tool in order to respect these agreements and to materialize them. So this guideline has definitions and recommendations, for instance, in terms of criteria that must be clear and transparent based on human rights, answering to the specific situation of the person. We have to respect the humanitarian criteria and also family, life and unity, bearing in mind the taxes, which usually is an obstacle, and also the procedures and information in a clear and transparent way in terms of the different stages. All these programs, as my colleague from Colombia said, it's a good practice from countries in order to reduce irregular migration. And we also see the need of accessible and inclusive decision making for all these migrants. Also going beyond visa system, which is not efficient. The document wants to establish the different rules for migrants in vulnerability. There's also a specific topic because this irregular situation creates exploitation, violence and abuse. So apart from the specific characteristic from the actual flow, which are mixed, we must overcome this difference between vulnerable migrants, labor migrants, or more or less vulnerable migrants. In that sense, I would like to urge this document to be read with wide eyes, wide vision, because we need general policies accessible, transparent for regularization, and we have to understand them as a way to get to rights and also for preventing vulnerability. In conclusion, thanks to Carolina and the rest leading this working group, I think the document is the result of a joint effort, especially in a difficult situation as the one created by the pandemic. And also thank you in terms of the proper and current situation of these migrant people. Thank you very much. Camila, thank you very much for your intervention, also for the analysis in terms of the GCM, but also the detailed analysis of what this guideline means, because it has no sense if it's not translated in a specific and practical policy that states can use. Thank you also for reminding us that these effective policies promote regular migration and not the contrary. So thank you very much for your words. Thank you, Camila. And now...
in this subsection, we're going to talk about human rights and humanitarian based pathways. And we have Jose Luis Pardo, Ambassador at Large for Migration of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and International Cooperation from Spain. And then we also have Leticia van der Venet from PICOM, the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, who is also a member of the working group. And we will start with Ambassador José Luis Pardo. Embajador, tiene la palabra.
Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank to the promoter of these guidelines, and also to the different countries organizing this event for inviting me to participate in this meeting. Because fighting against vulnerability is or should be a task for all of us. States, origin states, transit states, destination states, all of them are involved. Vulnerabilities of migrants are born in the country of origin. They are one of the main reasons for this decision to move to another country. But these vulnerabilities are bigger during the transit and also at the destination country. This destination country, at least that's what we think in Spain, to have active policies to avoid an increase in vulnerabilities which already exist, and also in order to avoid the creation of new vulnerabilities that we have in our countries. Management and policy, migration policy in Spain is based in specific principles, fighting against trafficking networks, also promoting new ways for legal migration and strengthening those that already exist, fighting against deep reasons for this non-voluntary movement, and also the respect to human rights and also respect to human dignity. And this respect to human rights and human dignity is the key for the measures adopted, at least in Spain, national measures adopted for the access and state of migrants in vulnerability. For the sake of the time I have, I cannot go deep in these measures, but I can mention some of them which are adopted even during the pandemic. For us, the pandemic was not an excuse. On the contrary, it was something we wanted to do. So some of the measures are the universal access to basic public services, including health. This is something that Spain had in previous years, but is something that from 2019 we did some changes with good results, specifically in the pandemic, where all residents in Spain have access to this universal health service. Second, we approved the minimum income. Now national and regular migrants and their families have access to this income. It complements the social service that already exists at the national, regional and local level in order to avoid work and social vulnerability, and also the specific problems of inclusion that come with that. The idea is the social inclusion of migrants, which is the key in our country. We have a tripartite working group that deals with these issues. We also have organizations from migrants. Due to the COVID, we adopted several measures in order to fight irregularization because of economic reasons. Specifically, we reduced the requirement to renew permits, and also for the application of the different rules which allows migrant people to expand their permits. We also delayed the non-voluntary return procedures, and we increased those voluntary return patterns and also with integration. And we also help with access to the labor work to migrants that already live in Spain and that now could access to specific sectors like agriculture or distribution, which were very needed during the pandemic. So migrants were very important in all these sectors during the pandemic. Another example of measures that we took, migration flow, massive migration flow that we saw in the Atlantic and also in the Canary Islands. We help moving international protection to the peninsula, also for asylum seekers and migrants in vulnerability situation. In this sense, vulnerability is important in order to see the execution of our national plans for resettlement. In conclusion, I would like to mention also non-accompanied minors and also women and young girls. In the first case, during the COVID, we decided to apply national treatment in terms of labor to this minor with automatic permits for working, also for residents. For minor who are 16 or more, in order to have a professional activity. We are also reforming the law in order to accelerate the issuance of documentation of these young people, and also the renewal and the application for this work permit for younger people while they are minor, and when they turn 18. For this we have a new law which will also affect all minors which are in Spain regardless of their status. In conclusion, in terms of gender, for Spain is one of the priorities from a political point of view to develop gender policies protecting women and young girls, regardless of the status of these women and these young girls which are here. They must be protected against violence. We've been protecting from many years now with positive discrimination, with specific guarantees for these women and these girls, protecting them of gender-based violence, especially in most vulnerable cases. To sum up and to finish my intervention, thank you for all this new effort. Is a cornerstone for executing the GCM for a safe, ordered and regular migration. In Spain, we are totally defenders of this GCM, and we look forward for the new forum which will be held next year. We hope this will allow us to advance with all this work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Pardo. And thanks for sharing all the different measures. They are all very positive measures implemented in Spain. Even during the pandemic, this minimum income, the access to health service, also this mixed movement, also minors, and of course not forgetting the gender vision, which is fundamental. And thank you also for mentioning that we are talking about human rights and human dignity.
And we have to make a last-minute change in the agenda. Leticia, we have the representative from the government of Portugal that needs to speak first, if you don't mind. So if that's okay, we will have that sub-panel or that representative, and then we'll come back to Leticia. And apologies about the last-minute change, but we'll come back to that. So we're going to speak now, or we're going to move into COVID-19 related pathways. And for that, we have Claudia Pereira, who is the Secretary of State for Integration and Migration from the government of Portugal. We will have Claudia first, and then we'll go back to Leticia. And then after that, we will have Chiara Kasuk from IOM, but I will explain that later. So for now, we start with Claudia, and the floor is yours, Claudia.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for this change. And I would like to say I'm really enjoying this event, and I also would like to thank the initiative of the guidance, which is very important for us and for public policies. So I would like to start by saying that to ensure that migrants and refugees, regardless of their situation, are treated, our commitment is to treat them as any Portuguese citizen. So we have made several advances towards promoting safe, orderly, and regular migration. Still much is needed to be done, but we have done already quite a lot. Our main message is that we want to include in any measure of the government, always we want to include migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And we do this by two strategies. First, to remove any obstacle. And secondly, that the migrants and the refugees, that the information reaches them. So we have made five main advances, and I will detail them. First, to remove obstacles, the documentation. As soon as COVID started, we did a temporary regulation for people with pending application. This was very important because they have the same rights as any other resident in Portugal regarding health, house, social security, and employment stability. In practical terms, this means that, and we are only a 10 million country population, more than 400,000 migrants were regularized during COVID. Secondly, in terms of social support, more than 155,000 foreign citizens could benefit of social support because of this. Also, we issued the number of social security in hours, so they could have automatically the number of social security. And like any Portuguese, the documents were expired, remain valid until the end of this year. And we also simplified the procedures for visas, residence permits, and renewal of residence permits. This was in terms of documentation. Secondly, in terms of healthcare and vaccination. Now our main priority is vaccination for everyone in Portugal. We don't want anyone to leave anyone behind. And so we created a vaccination online platform for foreign citizens in irregular situation. And until now, we have vaccinated 208,000 citizens from 195 nationalities. And like this, we want to guarantee the public health to everyone. Secondly, we also eliminated any user fee to the diagnosis and treatment of COVID for anyone in Portugal, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, anyone. And we also kept providing new health number to access to healthcare. And so in 2020 and 2021, we issued more than 89,000 health numbers. Third, the language learning. We gave a lot of attention to the language learning, and we made a major innovation. we covered migrants with pending regularization processes. So firstly, only migrants who are documented could learn Portuguese. And now any migrant who has their regularization process pending can learn, and also asylum seekers who still are waiting for their status. Then we also have extended the Portuguese language courses to much more language centers, where the Portuguese do their professional training, so that the migrants and refugees can do their professional training also there. We changed the timetables. We incorporated a new curricular unit for speakers of languages who do not use the Latin alphabet, like Urdu or Devanagari, others. And this was also one of our priorities. Regarding work, we are negotiating bilateral agreements of work with Morocco, Moldova, and India, and also a creation of a mobility space in the community of Portuguese-speaking language countries. We also open more immigrant professional insertion offices. Previously we had 11, now we have 23, and they are developed by associations of migrants or associations of development. And lastly, this was all removing obstacles and reaching information, and we always translated this information to more than 25 languages through the High Commission for Migration, so that this information could really reach the migrants. All these measures were provided for in the Global Compact for Migration, and it was very important to Portugal, and we are also very committed in its implementation, which is why it has been designated as a champion country by the United Nations. We have a whole of government approach, and I would like to stress the importance of the monthly meetings of the Pact in drawing up the decrees of regularization. Probably if it was not the Global Compact for Migration, we will not be so much working in network to issue this decrees. I would like to end that migration should not be seen as a problem, but as a solution, and their contributions to the Portuguese society should also be clearly stated. So regarding social security, I would like to say that in 2019, according to the report of Migration Observatory, the social security system in Portugal, only from the migrants, benefited 884 million euros. So this was the positive net. And this was a very important contribution, and also the diversity of having more than 195 nationalities in Portugal. It's a very rich social and cultural diversity. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thank you for sharing with us such a strong intervention. And you started and finished saying quite important things. So you started by saying that we need to treat migrants as that Portugal was treating migrants as any citizen, and you were saying that migration should not be seen as a problem but as a solution. And I think those are two very powerful statements. And thank you so much for sharing all the measures in terms of temporary regularization and access to social support and documentation, healthcare, vaccination, and education that Portugal has been taking forward, which is really a very good practice. So thank you for that. And now we will go back to Leticia from the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants. And I want to apologize, Leticia, again. We will go back to your intervention, which is part of the previous subsection, where we were talking about human rights and humanitarian-based pathways. And Leticia is also a member. PICOM is also a member of the working group. So the floor is yours, Leticia.
Thank you very much. And don't worry, we all know what busy schedules are like. So thank you for inviting us, and of course also for taking the lead on the guidance note. For those who don't know PICOM, we're a network of 167 organizations working in 30 countries to ensure social justice and human rights for undocumented people living in Europe. So it's important, of course, as many have mentioned here today, for countries to have pathways for admission and stay other than asylum specifically, because of mixed migration and because people living and working within a regular status are a fact. Across the world, all countries have undocumented people living on the territory. And it's crucial to understand that being undocumented itself creates vulnerability. As a rule, undocumented people live in poverty, often acute poverty. They have worse mental health than other migrants, often live in fear of the police and the authorities, and because of that, they are quite easy targets for exploitation, underpayment, and violence, as they will not turn to the police for help. Undocumented children and young people growing up undocumented grow up in a situation of perpetual stress, and because of an accumulation of problems like poverty, debt, social isolation, uncertainty about the future, which of course impacts their physical and mental health and development. Also, many undocumented people cannot return, either for administrative reasons or because there is a real risk and foreseeable risk of death, torture, or other irreparable harm. In fact, it's estimated by the European Commission that about 300,000 people cannot be returned for different reasons, including respect for non-refoulement, every year. And it's also crucial to recognize that asylum procedures assess a very specific ground for stay and do not assess other human rights grounds for like medical grounds, integration in the country of residence, or what durable solution would be in the best interest of a child, for example. Therefore, many countries, and we have heard several here today, have adopted ways for children and adults to access residence procedures from within the country of destination or residence, depending on the language that you use. However, having an in-country residence procedure is on sich not enough. We see that many of these procedures are inaccessible or expensive or wholly discretionary, and therefore miss the targets they want to reach. So firstly, it's important for countries to adopt residence procedures, and we've heard many here today, and I'm also very interested in looking into the Colombian situation. But secondly, it's important that any residence procedure that is accessible from within the country also complies to a couple of principles. So on the first hand, decisions should be made transparently according to clear and objective criteria that are well communicated. So there, I think, for example, that the Portuguese government has translated to 25 languages, all different measures, is a great example. They shouldn't also be too discretionary, as it leads to confusion and does not contribute to a fair and trustworthy migration system. I want to underline that, for example, in Brussels, Belgium, at this moment, 400 undocumented people have been on hunger strike for more than 50 days to demand clearer criteria and a clearer humanitarian regularization procedure. Also, any mechanism should be accessible and affordable. Some pathways for stay take years and cost thousands of euros, which is nearly impossible to afford if you live in poverty. Other countries, again Belgium for example, don't ask children to pay an administrative fee when applying for a humanitarian visa, and that is a great practice. The person himself, of course, should be able to apply, and the permit should not depend on other people. Free legal aid should be provided, as well as the right to appeal. And this is something we highly recommend, to involve civil society, including migrant associations, from the beginning, from design to implementation. For example, in the Swiss canton of Geneva, was Operation Papyrus, which was developed together with civil society and which had a very high rate of success. Lastly, I also want to underline that any residence permits should be as secure and long-term as possible. As temporary and short-term permits often only give a temporary solution. If people cannot extend or convert the residence status, they often fall back in limbo, and the cycle of exploitation and vulnerability continues. So thank you very much. I'm happy to discuss further afterwards.
Thank you so much, Leticia, and thank you for sharing those sort of principles that we need to take into account when adopting residency procedures, and for highlighting issues such as transparency, adaptability, the importance of free legal aid, as accessibility, and something very important, which is the fact that migrants themselves and civil society should also be included in the design for this, and the fact that the permanency versus temporariness and the importance of permanency and predictability. So this is very useful, and thank you for your intervention. We now move back to the subsection on COVID. And I have the pleasure to introduce Kyra Kasuk from the International Organization for Migration, IOM. And IOM is also a member of the working group. So welcome, Kyra, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, co-leads and colleagues from the Secretariat, and to all members of the various working groups, representatives from civil society organizations, government counterparts, and friends of the network joining us today. On behalf of IOM, we are glad to connect with you and to have contributed to this very important guidance note as part of our wider engagement with the network and in support of GCM implementation. After more than a year and a half since the outset of the pandemic, we all know too well that COVID-19 has had a profound impact on all aspects of regular migration and access to global cross-border mobility. While health-related entry requirements have replaced blanket travel bans in most cases, mobility restrictions and conditional entry requirements remain in place around the world. COVID-19 has reshaped the conditions to access mobility with impacts that will be long-lasting in the immigration system and for people on the move. For this reason, managing the availability and flexibility of pathways will be at the forefront of recovery efforts. Over the next few minutes, I will share highlights from IOM's thinking and recommendations on how to adapt and strengthen irregular migration pathways and admission stay processes. Resources such as this guidance note that is being presented today are crucial to guide these changes and ensure that post-COVID mobility is accessible to all. Public health responses have had a direct impact on immigration processes throughout the pandemic. In many countries, admission and stay procedures, including visa applications, were interrupted for months. Migrants found themselves stranded and unable to access crucial immigration services, which forced states to quickly modify admission and stay procedures. The guidance note provides several examples of new pathways and regularization schemes introduced by states during the pandemic, and as we just saw from Portugal's experience, providing access to temporary permits, removing obstacles with simplified procedures, and delivering renewals and extensions on a large scale are measures that were key to ensure states could continue to manage admission and stay despite the challenges linked to the pandemic, while guaranteeing migrants' rights through access to healthcare in Portugal's case. The pandemic has prompted the development of new solutions and remote tools for visa and permit application and processing, including new online platforms and travel apps. The development of vaccines and technology-based solutions to track travelers' health status is a key aspect of this, and proof of COVID-19 vaccination has already become one of the main prerequisites of the resumption of travel. However, COVID has already contributed to further widening the global mobility divide. Changing parameters for travel and higher costs can push migrants to seek out the help of intermediaries for their migration journeys, exposing them to more risks and leading to a potential increase in irregular migration. Regular pathways that are difficult to access or lack any meaningful facilitation risk becoming factors of vulnerability themselves. Reducing the complexity of admission and stay procedures is at the core of safe and orderly migration, since obstacles such as lack of information, prohibitive costs, and lack of dedicated support throughout the application process can contribute to widening the global mobility divide. These considerations are a key part of the guidance note and should also be at the core of the measures put in place by states in the context of COVID. The responsible use of these tools and health-related innovations requires global leadership and cooperation. Governments need to regulate admission and stay-related requirements, integrating comprehensive safeguards and data privacy standards to protect migrants' rights and ensure they do not further exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, where certain migrants, particularly those in more vulnerable situations, those of lower socioeconomic status and digital literacy, are excluded from accessing regular pathways at all. The shifting network of travel requirements and the new solutions implemented during the pandemic can be expected to alter migration management for the long term. Enhanced access to regular migration pathways will be key to COVID recovery, and adapting immigration procedures through flexible tools and improved information provision to migrants, as was also mentioned by Portugal, is key to fulfill the UN commitment to leave no one behind. IOM is committed to promoting dignified, orderly, and regular migration in support of people on the move and its member states. In many ways, the pandemic has demonstrated that enhancing access to regular migration pathways can ensure that both the needs of member states and migrants are met. It has shown the benefit of continually evaluating and adapting national admission frameworks, including to introduce new migration pathways and regularization schemes. expanding and diversifying the availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration, in particular those tailored to respond to the needs of migrants in vulnerable situations, requires the tools and resources to ensure that the steps behind admission and stay procedures are streamlined, rights-based, accessible, and transparent. The guidance note being presented today constitutes a uniquely practical tool for this. It offers key recommendations for setting up efficient pathways, including examples that can be adapted to various national contexts. COVID has altered the ways in which regular migration is accessed and can be expected to have a long-lasting impact on global mobility systems. While managing mobility in the context of the pandemic opens new challenges for inclusivity, regular pathways for admission and stay remain an effective tool to ensure the protection of migrants and their rights, including migrants in vulnerable situations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cara, for your intervention and really for highlighting the obstacles to mobility during COVID and the fact that it created this global mobility divide. And at the same time, there was room for thinking about new solutions, but lots of challenges that came with it. And also, thank you for talking about the importance of implementing measures and the importance of enhancing the flexibility of migration pathways as key to COVID recovery, as part of those recovery efforts, and linking all of these with the usefulness of the guidance note that is being launched, that is the purpose of this meeting. So thank you for that very useful intervention. And we're now moving to our last subsection or sub panel. And here we're going to be talking about disasters and climate change related pathways. And we have Lina Bren, Disaster Displacement Advisor from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. And we also have Timo Schmidt from the Platform on Disaster Displacement, who is a member of the working group. So I invite Lina Bren to the floor. I can't see Lina here. Lina, did you request the floor? While we try to see what's happening with Lina, maybe we can go ahead with Timo. Is that okay? Is that okay, Timo, from the Platform on Disaster Displacement?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carolina. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you. Yes.
Good, very much. Thank you, first of all. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, I would first like to congratulate the Thematic Working Group 3 on regular pathways for launching the guidance note. And also thank you for having the PDD Secretariat speak for a few minutes about effective practices on admission and stay in disaster and climate change contexts. We are very pleased about how the guidance note has been developed, and we're also very happy to have been part of this process, part of the mapping, the research, and the consultative process leading up to it, together with partners of the Technical Working Group 3. So as noted in GCM Objective 2, disasters, the adverse effects of climate change and environmental degradation are among the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to move. And as noted in the guidance note, that includes people having to leave or those who are unable to return to their homes in the context of sudden onset disasters. And it also includes people whose livelihoods or rights or wider socioeconomic situations have been negatively affected by the adverse effects of climate change linked to slow onset events and processes. So it is with that in mind that it is also important to think about and speak to these issues when discussing regular migration pathways. And to that end, we are also very pleased that many of the principles, policy instruments, and effective practices regarding admission and stay in disaster and climate change context that we identified in the agenda for the protection of cross-border displaced persons in the context of disasters and climate change, or perhaps more shortly known as the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda, have been included and have made it into the guidance note. A key finding and recommendation in the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda was that even if international law is relatively silent on standards and principles that apply or shall apply in cross-border displacement situations, many states have in fact developed a multitude of policy measures and instruments that can be used in such situations. These measures in the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda are referred to as humanitarian protection measures, and they refer to laws, policies, practices used by states to permit the admission and stay of cross-border disaster displaced persons on their territory. These measures have often been based on regular immigration law, on exceptional immigration categories, or provisions related to the protection of refugees or similar norms in international human rights law. In addition, states have also admitted disaster displaced persons on the discretionary power of migration authorities. So here we're talking about exercising discretion positively in the sense of international solidarity, responsibility sharing, and bilateral agreements. Examples of humanitarian protection mechanisms or policy instruments, as noted, can be divided in broadly 5 categories, which I'll just briefly outline, and these are also spelled out in the guidance notes. So the first of which includes regular migration categories, so that would include temporary residence and work permits. The second one includes exceptional migration measures, such as humanitarian visas and temporary protection. The third, and I'm sure Lena will talk about this as well, subsequently it will include free movement of persons. And the fourth includes special certificates or other supplemental documentation, so that could be including pastoralist transhumance agreements. And fifth and finally, also refugee law and similar protection under human rights law when applicable. So the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda has actually identified at the time, in 2015, at least 52 countries that have admitted or refrained from returning people using these measures and policy tools in the aftermath of disasters. And to conclude, with similar policy instruments and measures also included in the GCM, we hope that the launch of the guidance notes today and our joint work can strengthen international and collective efforts to use and expand these forms of regular migration pathways when people are compelled to move in the context of disasters and the adverse effects of climate change. So with that, I'll stop my brief intervention. Thank you very much again, and congratulations again for a successful launch.
Thank you so much, Timo, and thank you for the intervention being so concrete and highlighting how disaster, climate change, and environmental factors are really key factors now promoting prompting mobility, and talking specifically about the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda and the humanitarian protection measures, and going into more detail about that, and linking that also with the Global Compact for Migration and with the usefulness of the guidance note that we are launching today. So I think we now have Lena on the floor. So as I was explaining before, Lena Bren from the Disaster Displacement Advisor for the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. And welcome Lena today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you today, and sorry for the difficulties to connect beforehand. But as you have just mentioned, I'm the Disaster Displacement Advisor from IGAD. And for those who don't know IGAD, so IGAD is standing for Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and it is a regional organization covering the 8 countries in the Horn of Africa. So this includes Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and Uganda. And I'm very pleased today to specifically speak about the Free Movement of Persons Protocol, because of course there are also other activities that we are doing in the region that are in support of migration movements in the context of climate change. But very specifically, I think the Free Movement of Persons Agreement is like just a new instrument and a very a big opportunity, and it has really a great potential to be extremely useful, especially when it comes to the movement of people who are moving in the context of disasters and climate change. So maybe just quickly, I start with a quick background on the process where we are starting with this protocol, and because it actually is quite a recent one. It only started in 2017 when we had consultation with all our IGAD member states. And then it was followed in 2019 with 2 rounds of negotiations. And then last year in February in Khartoum, there was a big meeting when it was adopted by the sectoral ministers. And now just last month in June this year, it was then again adopted by the policy instruments from IGAD by the Council of Ministers. So the next steps will be that we want to have like the physical signature of each member state. Afterwards, it will be followed by ratification and then, of course, the domestication. So these are kind of the steps that are leading towards really having a proper free movement of persons regime in our region. And of course, specifically, like just generically, free movement of persons regimes are extremely useful just about to facilitate the regular movement of people. But in the IGAD region, it is actually the very first time that it specifically addresses the needs for the people affected by disasters and climate change. So there is one specific paragraph, so this is Article 16, which speaks about the movement of persons affected by disasters. And it says that member states actually shall allow citizens of another member states who are moving in anticipation of, during or in the aftermath of a disaster to enter into the territory, provided also that upon, like when they are coming and they don't have any travel documents, that they are registered in accordance with the national law. And also the second part and second component of this article is that they are saying that the member states also have to extend the stay when it is not possible or reasonable that these people are returning to their country of origin. So this actually shows that it is really like having a huge potential with this kind of paragraph, because of course, on the one hand, it kind of facilitates the entry and the stay, but it also allows those at risk of displacement to actually move to other countries before it becomes a disaster situation. And the third point, which is really why this is having a great potential, is that it is allowing people to stay as long as they have to, so as long as it is not possible or reasonable to return. So actually this protocol is now being in the stage of being signed and ratified, and afterwards, of course, the big part is about implementation as usual, because we all know we can have the best policy instrument, but in the end, they also need to be implemented. So for this, on the one hand, we also have a roadmap for implementation, which was adopted together with the protocol by the member states. But at the same time, we also need to already go quite fast, I think, because in this roadmap for implementation, it would request the member states to harmonize and develop and review their policies and procedures by the year of 2028. So this is already quite soon if we are looking into kind of these processes and how much this will probably take. But what we also have very concretely is, so we just launched a new program under the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, together with IOM, ILO, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, UNHCR, and us from IGAD. So this activity will specifically look at human mobility and climate change in the IGAD region. And one component of it is that we actually want to support the implementation of Article 16. And we are doing this by supporting the governments to come up with standard operational procedures on admission and stay in disaster displacement situations. So this means first we will support the development of draft SOPs. Then we have consultations with the member states. Afterwards, we will test them in simulation exercises to see whether on the ground this is actually working, and then we will finalize these SOPs. So I think with that, I will come to a conclusion and say thank you again for giving the opportunity to speak, and very happy to also afterwards give some thoughts and comments or questions, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina, for your excellent presentation and for talking about the free movement of persons protocol and the potential really that it has, and for explaining the process and specifying how it addresses the needs specifically of people affected by disasters and climate change, and extending the stay in some circumstances when returning not possible, and allowing people to stay for as long as needed, and also for giving it a practical like the practical implementation when you're talking about this new program on human mobility and climate change that is being implemented with funding from the Multi-Partner Trust Fund. So again, this a very practical intervention. And this brings us to the end of our presentations, of our panel, and I just want to thank all our panelists, because not only they share very relevant and interesting and different remarks with us, but also you have all been very good with keeping the time. And this is incredible because all of you have so much to say on the different areas and the different measures and things that countries and that organizations are doing. So thank you for being so mindful and for doing this in such a concrete way as you have all done today. So thank you again. And I think now what we're going to do is that we're going to give the rooms for some interventions from the floor. And the first one we have is from the representative of the government of Philippines, Enrico Foz, who is the Assistant Secretary and co-sponsor of this event. So thank you. First, thank you so much for co-sponsoring the event, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, moderator. And thank you for allowing us to speak in this and intervene in this launching of the guidance note on the regular pathways for admission and stay for migrants in situation of vulnerability. We believe that it is a useful tool for all member states, not only in building common understanding of what it is to be vulnerable, but more importantly, on addressing the concerns of migrants in vulnerable situations. The report says that there is no commonly agreed definition of situations of vulnerability in international law, and that factors contribute to vulnerability may intersect or coexist simultaneously, influencing and exacerbating each other, and also evolving and changing over time as circumstances, location, and duty bearers change. This is an important reminder for those of us engaged in the discourse of migration governance, that it is possible that others may not understand this issue the same way we do. And we are glad that the negotiation and the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration in 2018 and the work towards the IMRF for 2022 provide the opportunity for member states to articulate and advocate for protections for the vulnerable migrants in vulnerable situations. The Philippines, as you know, is a GCM champion and a staunch advocate for the protection of the rights and the promotion of the welfare of migrants. We fought hard for the adoption of the GCM. For over 2 years of consultations and negotiations, we argued that the objectives of the GCMs are practical and doable, that these are not simply aspirations. These are results of lessons learned from our actual practice and experience of serving over 10 million overseas Filipinos around the world. For over 4 decades, the Philippines have created a network of governmental institutions, all mandated to address our migrants' needs and concerns. We also have active involvement of the civil society, collaborating with government in the promotion of migrants' rights, in the whole of government and the whole of society approach to migration governance and sustainable development, from credentials and skills recognition, recruitment, pre-departure, post-arrival, consular assistance, social report, safe and return and reintegration. Before GCM gave us the words to encapsulate these principles into pathways for regular migration in Objective 5, drivers of migration in Objective 2, strengthening centrality and predictability in Objective 12, we already have been at hard work to provide these frameworks through bilateral agreements. The Philippines has negotiated over 40 bilateral labor agreements, as well as 15 social security agreements, most of which are still in force. Before the guidance note, we have taken serious note of the 2014 OHHR recommended principles and guidance on human rights at international border, and the 2018 GMD principles and guidelines on the human rights of protections of migrants in vulnerable situations. Also in 2016, working with the US and other states, we developed Migrants in Countries in Crisis, or the MICIC guidelines, to address vulnerabilities of migrants in crisis situations. We have always recognized that migrant workers are not, and migrants are not inherently vulnerable. However, we certainly recognize that they find themselves in vulnerable situations as a result of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, inequality, structural and societal dynamics, and personal circumstances. Hence, our readiness to craft frameworks and support legislations to articulate the responsibility of governments as human rights duty bearers to offer protections and negotiate with bilateral partners to extend these protections when abroad. We are also on the verge of consolidating migrant affairs issues into one government agency to break down silos and to streamline processes needed to achieve a seamless whole of migration cycle assistance to Filipinos overseas. Perhaps we have the negotiations of the GCM to thank for all these efforts of the government now. The COVID-19 pandemic, with its resulting massive displacement of migrants and the onward repatriation of stranded migrants, have tested our institutions beyond capacity. This is the first time that over 1 million Filipino migrants abroad returned to the Philippines within a short period of time. I am sure that this is an experience shared by countries of origin that took up the challenge of repatriating their nationals stranded abroad. Repatriation is just among the first big steps in helping the migrants. It is not a separate mission that stands alone. Once repatriates come home, adequate programs and services are necessary for their reintegration back to our society. For those who cannot be repatriated, our embassies and consulates are lodged with services offering them with financial and welfare assistance to assist our distressed nationals and keep them out of harm's way. Leading up to the IMRF in 2022, the Philippines is of the view that our collective commitment to the GCM principles and objectives is a reminder for all of us to be inclusive and to leave no migrant behind, especially in responding to pandemic. GCM works across corridors. Good migration governance is in the interest of all, whether you are a country of origin, transit, or destination. In addition to fair and ethical recruitment and availability of decent work, we should also be focusing on social protections and portability of social security entitlements of migrants. We are of the view that these facilitate reduction of vulnerabilities throughout the migration cycle and during the period of uncertainty as shown by the pandemic. We strongly encourage countries of destination to provide insurance coverage, among others, with no or little cost to migrants as part of decent work package, so that migrants are not left behind in limbo. We look forward to contributing to the discussion of the COVID-19 pathways as we note focus on the experience of host communities and facilitating the admissions and stay of those impacted by the temporary suspensions of forced returns. We may be able to share our experience on emergency preparedness and response measures to address vulnerabilities in the context of future emergencies. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Enrico, and for linking it with the implementation of the GCM and the role of Philippines as a champion country, and reminding us that migrants are not vulnerable per se, but they are in situations of vulnerability, and that really no single migrant should be left behind. Thanks for that. And now we have the representative from the government of Thailand, Ms. Chompunut Pasum, and I'm sorry about the pronunciation, Chompunut. I would like to remind there is quite a number of requests for the floor, so I remind our representatives if you could speak for 2 minutes or so. That's wonderful, and the floor is yours, Mr. Punut.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon. I would like to first thank the co-lead of the Thematic Working Group 3 for organizing this event and for introducing such a comprehensive guidance note. Thailand would like to reaffirm our continued commitment in GCM implementation, including in Objective 5 and Objective 7, the reason of which we co-sponsored this event together with our friends. Thailand has made continuous efforts in enhancing availability of pathway for regular migration. We believe this will not only reduce and prevent the vulnerabilities that migrants may face, but also allows for access to healthcare and services, an area that we have always attached importance and one that we volunteer to be GCM champion country for. Please allow me to share Thailand's experiences as follows. First, we regularized over 2 million undocumented migrants over the past few years, enabling them to be legally protected and gain access to basic social services such as healthcare and education. The most recent being the cabinet resolution in December last year to regularize the remaining undocumented migrant workers with an aim to ensure their access to health services within the context of ongoing COVID-19. Second, Labor MOU between Thailand and our neighboring countries have expanded avenues for legal labor migration and help reducing risk of vulnerabilities, particularly the exploitation and trafficking in person. This scheme has currently benefited more than 500,000 of migrant workers. Third, victims of human trafficking in Thailand are allowed to temporarily stay in the country and have access to employment before returning to their home countries. In addition, last year, the government extended the stay and work permits for migrants in order to minimize the adverse impact of the pandemic on their livelihoods. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Shampunud, and I want to say thank you to the government of Thailand because Thailand is also co-sponsoring this event, and also thank you for your very concrete intervention and for letting us know about the measures that have been taken by Thailand and about also about all what Thailand is doing in terms of GCM implementation and in terms of the role as one of the GCM champion countries as well. Now we have the representative from the government of Morocco, Wayam Labiad, who is in the permanent mission of Morocco, and again, like Thailand and Philippines, Morocco is co-sponsoring the event. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to thank the working group for organizing this very important event. Morocco was co-sponsor of this event and also an active country champion of the GCM. We would like to share a few points. First, under high guidance of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, Morocco adopted a national strategy on immigration and asylum based on human and solidarity values in line with the international commitment. Proactive and exemplary, the Moroccan migration policy enabled the organization of 2 regularization campaigns during which several requests were examined and resulted in the regularization of more than 50,000 migrants. The Moroccan strategy allows migrants to benefit from full access to public services, including health, education, and job opportunities. It reflects the Constitution's principles, in particular its Article 30, which grants migrants the same rights as Moroccans, including the right to vote in local elections. Morocco also provides refugees and asylum seekers with a wide range of possibilities in terms of protection, assistance, and socioeconomic support, given the growing number of people seeking international protection in the country. According to UNHCR, the kingdom hosts more than 15,000 refugees. According to UNHCR, 9,000 refugee children have been born in Morocco since 2015 and have had immediate access to a legal identity, which is not the case in many countries. Similarly, 90% of refugee children are enrolled at school, a figure above the global average. Likewise, the Kingdom of Morocco includes migrants and refugees in the COVID-19 vaccination campaign. National authorities coordinate with humanitarian partners to ensure the inclusion of refugees in this campaign and provide them with the information needed to make informed decisions. Furthermore, the program for refugees economic integration in Morocco has financed more than 807 projects led by refugees in order to enhance their financial empowerment. According to a recent national survey conducted by the High Commission for Planning, 48% of migrants living in Morocco have a paid job. Throughout the course of history, Morocco has always refused the use of immigration detention as a migration management tool, taking into account that the kingdom is not only a country of origin, but also a transit and destination country. The Kingdom of Morocco continues to make major efforts in terms of dismantling migrant smuggling networks and aborting attempts of irregular migration, adding to that actions for assistance of victims and vulnerable people, especially operations of search and rescue at sea, which provided assistance to 19,500 irregular migrants in distress at sea. The cost that the kingdom assumes to preserve the good neighborhood is considerable. For instance, in the fight against irregular migration, Morocco has aborted 13,000 attempts of irregular immigration since 2017, dismantled more than 5,000 trafficking networks, and recorded just alone 48 assault attempts in the city of Ceuta, in the north of Morocco. Morocco's experience can be shared on the National Coordination Commission for Preventing and Combating Human Trafficking, including the establishment of national referral mechanism for victims of trafficking in person, and the program of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights concerning the strengthening of capacities of law enforcement officers and custom agents on human rights issues in Morocco. These significant results demonstrate that Morocco's major contribution in terms of regional security as it assumes full responsibility of solidarity-based migration management and works with its partners to concretely ensure the principles of shared responsibility. However, movements towards Europe represents only the tip of the iceberg. The majority remains close to home, with over 5.4 million refugees and internally displaced people in the Sahel and North African countries. According to UNHCR global statistics, 80% of people who flee stay within their region of origin. The death toll of migrants at sea is disturbing. According to UNHCR, so far in 2021, at least 500 persons are known to have lost their lives trying to make the dangerous sea crossing along the central Mediterranean route, compared to 150 in the same period in 2020. As an increase of more than 200%. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Wayam, for speaking about the different measures that Morocco has taken in light of COVID-19, but also the different measures, including regularization and many others, and describing them in detail. And thank you again for co-sponsoring the event. And now I pass on the floor to Andrew Rose, who is the representative from the government of Australia.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this event this afternoon. Thank you to the panelists for all of your fascinating interventions, and also congratulations to the working group on the development of the guidance note, which is a very useful document and contribution to our consideration of this issue. I just wanted to take the opportunity to briefly highlight two Australian practices, which we thought might be of interest to the broader group. The first is our Women at Risk program, which is an element of our broader humanitarian program. It commenced in 1989. It is for female applicants and their dependents who are subject to persecution or are people of concern to UNHCR. They are living outside their home country without the protection of a male relative and are in danger of victimisation, harassment or serious abuse because of their gender. So since the inception of this program just over 30 years ago, over 26,000 visas have been granted to vulnerable women and their dependents under that program, allowing them to take advantage of a regular pathway to Australia and to remove them from their situation of vulnerability. The other illustration, which we thought might be of interest, is our human trafficking visa framework. It is one part of a much broader national action plan to combat modern slavery or human trafficking. The human trafficking visa framework regularises the status of unlawful non-citizens in Australia. So it's an illustration of regularisation. These people are assessed by the Australian Federal Police as being suspected victims of trafficking. And the regularisation allows them to remain in Australia. There are two classes of visas. One is a temporary one, which is allowing them to, or is enabling them to stay lawfully in Australia for recovery and reflection. And the duration of that temporary visa can sometimes be extended or will be extended if necessary to allow them to participate in criminal justice processes. And it can also be granted to facilitate entry or re-entry after short-term travel overseas in order to commence or resume their assistance in those criminal justice processes. There is also, as part of that framework, a permanent pathway where the person is allowed to remain in Australia. They've cooperated with authorities, and but if they're in danger, if they return to their home country, then it becomes a permanent pathway. So I thought those two illustrations of Australian practice might be of interest. And then I just want to take the opportunity quickly to echo the comments made by our colleague from IOM and kind of the call for global cooperation to address the challenge of mobility during a pandemic. And I think this is going to be necessary if we're going to ensure the reinstatement and the maintenance of regular pathways and to avoid driving people into who are in situations of vulnerability into adopting irregular pathways. So I think there is a need for the interested community, whether that be member states or broader, to come together to kind of translate the emerging patchwork of health measures that we're finding at the border into something that resembles a degree of standardization and predictability. So I just want to echo that call from IOM that that's kind of a challenge that all of us who are interested in regular pathways need to embrace and collectively come together to solve. Thanks very much, Carolina.
Many thanks, Andrew, for your intervention and for sharing with us the Women at Risk program and the human trafficking visa framework in Australia, and also for calling for this international cooperation that is so important within the context that we're living. Now we have for the floor, we have Gabriel Aiello, a representative from the UNODC. So Gabriel, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carolina. I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes, we see you and we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank the network for convening this event and the representatives of member states who spoke so far for their insightful remarks. It is a pleasure for UNODC to join this important occasion. Congratulations also to the Thematic Working Group 3 for the timely publication of this guidance note. The issue of improving the human rights protection of people on the move, especially in the context of responses to migrant smuggling, features prominently among UNODC's priorities this year. The Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice has dedicated its 2021 sessions to discussing how to best align the criminal justice agenda with human rights protection of smuggled migrants. Its reconvened session will be held on 8 December this year and will be another opportunity to exchange on this issue. The note we're launching today complements UNODC's efforts to expand access to pathways for regular migration as a way to reduce migrant smuggling and the exposure of smuggled migrants to human rights violations and aggravated forms of migrant smuggling, such as in trafficking in persons, violence, extortion, or even death. The link between the unavailability of regular pathways and the use of smuggling services is a topic that will be discussed as a thematic priority by the Working Group on the Smuggling of Migrants of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime in October this year in Vienna. This nexus between smuggling and the availability of regular pathways is therefore a key concern for member states, which will discuss ways to effectively implement provisions of the Smuggling of Migrants Protocol, including in the framework offered by the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. The session will offer a key opportunity for states parties to the protocol to issue recommendations based on the guidance note we're launching today and to give effect, implement this guidance note, hopefully. We really encourage an active participation of states parties and experts in this session. Finally, the appraisal of the Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons will take place in November this year. Is a process that happens every 4 years and will result in a political declaration. This will be another occasion for states to strongly commit to increase availability of regular pathways for migration as a way to reduce trafficking in persons in mixed migration flows. Objective 9 of the Global Compact reminds us all how important it is to tackle migrant smuggling as part of broader interventions to promote safe, orderly, and regular migration. On behalf of UNODC, I would like to therefore warmly welcome today's launch of the guidance note, which is extremely valuable, and reconfirm our commitment to work as one of the members of the network's executive committee and continue advocating for the enhancement of pathways for regular migration, including as a means to curb the business of migrant smugglers and prevent trafficking in persons in the context of international migration. Thank you very much for your attention, and floor back to you, Carolina.
Thanks so much, Gabriele, and thank you for highlighting the Commission on Crime Prevention and also for talking about this nexus between smuggling and availability or lack of availability of regular pathways, which is so important. We now move to I think we had a request from ILO, but I cannot see on the floor. So maybe if we pass on the floor to Victor Janina.
Si se me ve.
Can you see me? No, we don't see you. Okay, as long as you can hear and listen to me, it's fine. My name is Victor Janina. I'm a representative of Scalabrini International Migration Network. It's a network with civil society organizations. We have presence in 5 continents, more than 30 countries. First of all, thanks for the document. We think it's a very complete document, and we appreciate that it's centered in people and not in other kind of needs. We have 2 observations and 3 proposals. First observation is that it was clear before the pandemic that migrant workers are essential for the economic structure of the countries of destination. With the pandemic, this has been clearer, but also their vulnerability, as they don't have access, as it's reflected in the document, to basic health services, for instance. Second comment, we urge states to implement and to take into account the proposals in the note, because structural causes are those that make people leave their countries. And with the pandemic, this situation was even worse. And we can foresee, as some representative already said, that the number of migrants will increase. So the need to implement beforehand all these proposals which are in the note, and also to explore other. The three proposals we have are the following. First, related to paragraph 30, in terms of accessibility to public services. We suggest to strengthen cooperation mechanisms, which are already in some countries, from migrant centers administered by the civil society and the government, in order to create and to help migrants during the processes for having residency, for instance. Paragraph 35, we propose to create consultative bodies with all stakeholders to work together in designing mechanisms to monitor the implementation of national policies for regular stay of migrant people. These policies must deal with protection, integration to society. And three, and last, it's about paragraph 38 in the note. In several countries, there are organizations which give educative and capacitation services to guarantee the integration of migrant people in the societies of destination. Here it is very important to work together, national governments, international institutions, and also social civil society organizations. Thank you very much. That's all from my side. Thank you, Victor. Thanks for stating the situation of these migrant people that don't have access to services, also for the importance of implementing the note, and for all the ideas you just mentioned. And
Paul Dacon from ILO. And after Paul, we're closing the floor and going to the closing of the event with Amy from the UN Migration Network. So we go ahead, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the connection issues earlier. Excellencies, colleagues, friends and partners from civil society and UN agencies. First of all, I'd like to really congratulate the co-chairs and the whole working group for the excellent work that they've done, the facilitation of the co-chairs, and ultimately the successful delivery of this guidance, which really, I think, does a great job of integrating the perspectives of a wide range of stakeholders and actors, as well as the relevant international human rights and labour standards that are relevant to this topic. Now, the work of this TWG, we find, has really important synergies with the TWG that ILO and IOM are co-leading on bilateral labour migration agreements. The TWG on bilateral labour migration agreements is finalising guidance on these on the development and implementation of these agreements based on international human rights and labour standards and social dialogue to try and promote safe, orderly and regular labour migration that benefits all parties. And we think that by producing and implementing this guidance, we can really help to reduce the number of people and migrants finding themselves in situations of vulnerability. As many speakers have noted, vulnerability is not inherent; it's something that's created. And so, by addressing the conditions of labour migration, we believe that and ensuring that we have fair and ethical recruitment, decent work for migrant workers, support throughout the entire process, we can really do good work to reduce the kind of vulnerabilities that migrants face. And we believe then that the fact that we have these two different TWGs really working together, in one hand to try and prevent migrants from falling into vulnerability, and on the other hand to address the consequences for those who perhaps slip between the cracks. And we believe that this is really an excellent example of the 360-degree vision of the GCM, which addresses migrant protection comprehensively, and the coordinated approach, which is championed by the UN Network on Migration, which is really bringing that 360-degree vision into reality. So I'd just like to congratulate and thank once again the authors, and to say that we really hope that the guidance will be widely used by states, stakeholders, UN agencies to guide advocacy, policy reform, and concrete initiative to improve the lives of all migrants and migrant workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for sharing with us about the work of Working Group 4 and the production of the guidance on implementation of bilateral labor agreements, and also how the complementary nature in between the work of the working groups. And I think you finished very well the panel by talking about the 360-degree of the GCM, and also which also involves a whole of society approach. So that's a great way of finishing. So I want to pass on the floor to Amy, and before that, I just want to thank again all our speakers, all the people that participated so actively on the floor. I thought that the interventions were fantastic. So thank you, everyone, and I pass on the floor to Amy Mueddin from the UN Network of Migration. Amy.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Thanks very much for the excellent moderation of that panel. And let me thank OHCHR and your organization, the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network and ACT Alliance, and your working group members for launching this guidance note on behalf of the network. It is really a crucial element of the network's work plan. And with that, I just want to take a moment to echo what Paul from ILO said, that the guidance note really takes a very comprehensive approach to the GCM and also to the work of the network. So it is greatly appreciated. And I'll just take a moment or two to reflect on what we heard today. We did have excellent representation from the panel today, and also from the floor, of the good work and the commitment towards providing or improving regular pathways for migrants in situations of vulnerability. And in this aspect, it was really helpful to hear from so many diverse voices on the topic. A number of positive practices were highlighted for us today, including through the continuation of this pandemic. And I found that, what we heard today reminded us of several things. The first is the crucial importance of migrants in our communities and as members of our societies, but not only during these difficult times, because migrants need not be heroes during difficult times for them to be ensured the protection of their rights or have access to regular and safe channels for migration. Second is the importance of regular pathways as an essential element of good migration governance. And we heard today how much of that really cuts across other priorities, including on the human rights of migrants, including on the safety and health and development of our societies. And the third is that the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration remains a robust framework for international cooperation on migration. Now, we all know that the Global Compact is centered around 10 guiding principles, but I just want to take a moment to highlight in particular the guiding principle on international cooperation, because as we saw in the guidance note launched today, that work on improving or providing regular pathways emphasizes this point, that pathways, discretionary pathways in particular, are put in place as an exercise of solidarity and international cooperation. And in effect, this type of international cooperation for regular pathways occurs because it's a recognition that doing so is a benefit for all, for migrants, for communities, for countries, for governments. And it also ensures their protection, migrants' protection, the protection of their rights, including in situations of vulnerabilities. So I would ask us in terms of next step to look forward. Next May likely will be there will be the first global review of the Global Compact, the International Migration Review Forum, likely to take place next May. And it'll be an important moment for us to see how we've implemented the Global Compact. Because what we've been seeing and hearing so far up until now, excuse me, including through the regional reviews of the Global Compact, is that there are a number of positive practices and implementation plans at the national level for the Global Compact, and these are all excellent. But we need to know what we need to do to support more or give more attention to efforts of international cooperation on migration. So we should really take this opportunity on the road to the IMRF to examine international cooperation efforts on regular pathways in particular, and see how we can improve on this. And this really requires us to embrace the guiding principles again of the Global Compact, including the whole of government and whole of society approach. And for us to really examine this, it would be important for us to roll out this guidance at the regional or country levels for its most practical impact. As you know, as part of the capacity building mechanism of the Global Compact, the network established a migration network hub, which hosts and calls for not only a repository of such information, including on regular pathways, but also provides discussion spaces so we may continue to learn from each other from a number of these positive practices, including today's event. So I hope that this provides an idea of a practical next step forward to move forward collectively, as we certainly have a growing number of countries who continue to champion the GCM. And in this regard, it was very excellent to hear from a number of the champion countries today. I know we heard from Colombia, Morocco, the Philippines, Portugal, and Thailand, and I hope I'm not excluding any. But it was also great to have a diversity of UN stakeholder and government voices on the panel today. And with that, I just want to thank again OHCHR, APRRN, and the ELACT Alliance for this excellent work. I wish everyone a brilliant day, and we hope to see you shortly. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.